Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, 1743–1826, was the author of the Declaration of Independence and third President of the United States. He founded the Democratic Party, the University of Virginia, and the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom. Jefferson orchestrated the Louisiana Purchase and the abolishment of slave trade in the United States. He instigated the Lewis and Clark Expedition, which was exploration of the current NW United States, a large geographic area where Americans had never seen before. He was an expert in the behavior patterns of each Indian tribe and kept meticulous notes. He played a major part in shaping American governmental theory and practice. But most of all, Jefferson possessed a revolutionary mentality towards the rights of man. Throughout his life, he proclaimed his absolute opposition to the institution of slavery. He considered it to be a scar upon the integrity of mankind and of the United States. Yet he was by birth a slaveholder, and he never released his slaves to freedom. He referred to the Africa slave as a wolf by the ears. You could not turn it loose, or it will devour America. Jefferson's interests were quite varied and came close to the Renaissance ideal of the universal man. He supported a philosophy of government based on popular sovereignty and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. He believed that all government should rest upon the consent of the governed. Jefferson had faith in the capacity of the people for self-government, but thought education a prerequisite to efficiency and understanding. He was in favor of property-holding requirements for the voter, and if alive today, he would probably advise strong literacy testing for the opportunity to vote. Jefferson thought an agricultural economy to be superior to an industrial one. He believed urban people to be basically corrupt, and the small farmer to be the backbone of a strong republic. He believed that any loss of national income from agriculture would be made up in happiness and permanence of government. He favored strong local government over a larger centralized power, decentralization. He visualized thousands of small localities governed by individuals known to the people. To Jefferson, freedom was not an opportunity to enjoy the labors and sacrifices of a previous generation, but a duty to complete the work left undone by their fathers. Jefferson was a lawyer, an architect, a businessman, inventor, politician, and a farmer. He was well versed in literature, art, paleontology, ethnology, geography, and botany. Within Mr. Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia, released in 1787, the chapter on laws discusses proposed legislation that would be to the benefit of an ongoing concern of a democracy. Although he had not planned on these notes being published to the world, a French language copy had been released without his permission. Many parts were erroneously stated, so he was obliged to release the original version. The notes were originally meant only for the eyes of heads of state within the United States and France. Quotations by Thomas Jefferson, to emancipate all slaves born after passing the act. The bill reported by the revisers does not itself contain this proposition, but an amendment containing it was prepared to be offered to the legislature whenever the bill should be taken up, and further directing that they should continue with their parents to a certain age, then be brought up, at the public expense, to tillage, arts, or sciences, according to their geniuses, till the females should be 18 and the males 21 years of age, when they should be colonized to such place as the circumstances of the time should render most proper, sending them out with arms, implements of household and of the handicraft arts, seeds, pairs of the useful domestic animals, etc., to declare them a free and independent people, and extend to them our alliance and protection, till they shall have acquired strength, and to send vessels at the same time to other parts of the world for an equal number of white inhabitants. To induce to migrate hither, proper encouragements were to be proposed. It will probably be asked, why not retain and incorporate the blacks into the state, and thus save the expense of supplying by importation of white settlers, the vacancies they will leave. Deep-rooted prejudices entertained by the whites. 10,000 recollections by the blacks of the injuries they have sustained, new provocations, the real distinctions which nature has made, and many other circumstances will divide us into parties and produce convulsions which will probably never end but in the extermination of the one or the other race. To these objections, which are political, may be added others, which are physical and moral. The first difference which strikes us is that of color. Whether the black of the Negro resides in the reticular membrane between the skin and skin itself, whether it proceeds from the color of the blood, the color of the bile, or from that of some other secretion, the difference is fixed in nature, and is as real as if its seat and course were better known to us. And is this difference of no importance? Is it not the foundation of a greater or less share of beauty in the two races? Are not the fine mixtures of red and white, the expressions to every passion by greater or less suffusions of color in the one, preferable to that eternal monotony which reigns in the countenances, that immovable veil of black which covers all the emotions of the other race? Add to these flowing hair, a more elegant symmetry of form, their own judgment in favor of whites, declared by their preference of them, as uniformly as is the preference of the orang-utan for the black women over those of his own species. Orang-utan is the chimpanzee KC. The circumstances of superior beauty is thought worthy attention in the propagation of our horses, dogs, and other domestic animals. Why not in that of man? Besides those of color, figure, and hair, there are other physical distinctions proving a difference of race. They have less hair on the face and body. They secrete less by the kidneys and more by the glands of the skin, which gives them a very strong and disagreeable odor. This greater degree of transportation renders them more tolerant of heat and less so of cold than the whites. Perhaps, too, a difference of structure in the pulmonary apparatus, which a late ingenious experimentalist has discovered to be the principal regulator of animal heat, may have disabled them from extricating, in the act of inspiration, so much of that fluid from the outer air, or obliged them, in expiration, to part with more of it. They seem to require less sleep. A black after hard labor through the day will be induced by the slightest amusements to sit up till midnight, or later, though knowing he must be out with the first dawn of the morning. They are at least as brave and more adventuresome, but this may perhaps proceed from a lack of forethought which prevents their seeing a danger till it be present. They do not go through it with more coolness or steadiness than the whites. They are more ardent after their female, but love seems with them to be more an eager desire than a tender, delicate mixture of sentiment and sensation. Their griefs are transient, those numberless afflictions which render it doubtful whether heaven has given life to us in mercy or in wrath, are less felt, and sooner forgotten with them. In general, their existence appears to participate more of sensation than reflection. To this must be ascribed their disposition to sleep when abstracted from their diversions, and unemployed in labor. An animal whose body is at rest, and who does not reflect, must be disposed to sleep, of course. Comparing them by their faculties of memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory they are equal to whites, in reason much inferior, as I think one could scarcely be found capable of tracing and comprehending the investigation of Euclid, and that, in imagination, they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous. It would be unfair to follow them to Africa for this investigation. We will consider them here, on the same stage with whites, and where the facts are not apocryphal, on which a judgment is to be formed. It will be right to make great allowances for the difference of condition, of education, of conversation, of the sphere in which they move. Many millions of them have been brought to and born in America. Most of them, indeed, have been confined to tillage, to their own homes and their own society. Yet many have been so situated that they might have availed themselves of the conversation of their masters. Many have been brought up to the handicraft arts, and from that circumstance have always been associated with the whites. Some have been liberally educated, and all have lived in countries where the arts and sciences are cultivated to a considerable degree, and have had before their eyes samples of the best works from abroad. But never yet could I find that a black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration, never see even an elementary trait of painting or sculpture. In music they are generally more gifted than the whites with accurate ears for tuning and time, and they have been found capable of imagining a small catch. Whether they will be equal to the composition of a more extensive run of melody or of complicated harmony is yet to be proved. Misery is often the parent of most affecting touches in poetry. Among the blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. Love is the peculiar oestrum of the poet. Their love is ardent, but it kindles the senses only, not the imagination. Religion indeed has produced a Phyllis Whately, but it could not produce a poet. The compositions published under her name are below the dignity of criticism. The improvement of the blacks in body and mind, in the first instance of their mixture with the whites, has been observed by everyone, and proves that their inferiority is not the effect merely of their condition of life. We know that among the Romans, about the Augustan age especially, the condition of their slaves was much more deplorable than that of the blacks on the continent of America. The two sexes were confined in separate apartments, because to raise a child costs the master more than to buy one. Cato, for a very restricted indulgence to his slaves in this particular, took from them a certain price. But in this country the slaves multiply as fast as the free inhabitants. Their situation and manners place the commerce between the two sexes almost without restraint. The same Cato, on a principle of economy, always sold his sick and superannuated slaves. He gives it as a standing precept to master visiting his farm, to sell his old oxen, old wagons, old tools, old and diseased servants, and everything else become useless. Yet notwithstanding these and other discouraging circumstances among the Romans, their slaves were often there. Rarest artists. They excelled too in science, insomuch as to be usually employed as tutors to their masters' children. But the slaves were the races of the whites. It is not their condition, then, but nature, which has produced the distinction. Whether further observation will or will not verify the conjecture that nature has been less bountiful to them in the endowments of the head, I believe that in those of the heart she will be found to have done them justice. That disposition to theft with which they have been branded must be ascribed to their situation, and not to any depravity of the moral sense. The man in whose favor no laws of property exist probably feels himself less bound to respect those made in favor of others. When arguing for ourselves, we lay it down as a fundamental, that laws, to be just, must give a reciprocation of right, that, without this, they are mere arbitrary rules of conduct, founded in force and not in conscience, and it is a problem which I give to the master to solve, whether the religious precepts against the violation of property were not framed for him as well as his slaves, and whether the slave may not as justifiably take a little from one who has taken all from him, as he may slay one who would slay him. That a change in the relations in which a man is placed should change his ideas of moral right and wrong is neither new nor peculiar. To the color of the blacks, Homer tells us it was so 2,600 years ago. Joe fixed it certain that whatever day makes man a slave takes half his worth away. But the slaves of which Homer speaks were white. Notwithstanding these considerations which must weaken their respect for the laws of property, we find among them numerous instances of the most rigid integrity, and as many as among their better instructed masters, of benevolence, gratitude, and unshaken fidelity. The opinion that they are inferior in the faculties of reason and imagination must be hazarded with great diffidence. To justify a general conclusion requires many observations, even where the subject may be submitted to the anatomical knife, to optical glasses, to analysis by fire or by solvents. How much more then where it is a faculty, not a substance, we are examining, where it eludes the research of all the senses, where the conditions of its existence are various and variously combined, where the effects of those which are present or absent bid defiance to calculation. Let me add, too, as a circumstance of great tenderness, where our conclusion would degrade a whole race of men from the rank in the scale of beings which their creator may perhaps have given them. To our reproach it must be said that though for a century and a half we have had under our eyes the races of black and of red men, they have never yet been viewed by us as subjects of natural history. I advance it therefore as a suspicion only that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind. It is not against experience to suppose that different species of the same genus, or varieties of the same species, may possess different qualifications. Will not a lover of natural history, then, one who views the gradations in all the races of animals, with the eye of philosophy, excuse an effort to keep those in the department of man as distinct as nature has formed them? This unfortunate difference of color, and perhaps of faculty, is a powerful obstacle to the emancipation of these people. Many of their advocates, while they wish to vindicate the liberty of human nature, are anxious also to preserve its dignity and beauty. Some of these, embarrassed by the question what further is to be done with them, join themselves in opposition with those who are actuated by sordid avarice only. Among the Romans, emancipation required but one effort. The slave, when made free, might mix with, without straining the blood of his master. But with us a second is necessary, unknown to history. When freed, he is to be removed beyond the reach of mixture. Jefferson, the man who originated the statement, "All men are created equal," also made a related statement which very few Americans have ever read. He said, "Nothing is more unequal than the equal treatment of unequal people." In conclusion, we must consider the wisdom of Jefferson's words when he stated, "Nothing is written more clearly than the blacks are destined to be free. However, the two races, equally free, cannot live within the same government." The last sentence not written on the Jefferson Monument, but the first is written on it. American Colonization Society. Also, during the Jefferson era, a group of prominent Americans formed the American Colonization Society, organized in 1816. Among the members were Henry Clay, Speaker of the House, and James Madison, 4th President of the United States. The function of the society was not to denounce slavery, but to remove all free black residents from the United States to a colonization point in Africa. Inspired by the Sierra Leone Company, a previous black Return to Africa organization, the society, with grant money from the U.S. government, located Liberia along the coast of Africa as a settlement point for all blacks in the United States. The capital was named Monrovia after James Monroe, president, and another supporter of the project. Apparently, the society was dedicated to the accomplishment of an all-white America. Henry Clay was pleased with the goals of the society because America was removing a useless and pernicious, if not dangerous, portion of its population, and of all classes of our population, the most vicious is that of a free colored people. Jefferson considered the attempt noble. However, he realized the limitations of such an enormous project. The society only settled less than 15,000 blacks to Liberia, so the society could not even keep pace with the high birth rate of existing free blacks. In 1820, there were about 1.5 million blacks in the U.S. However, by 1860, there were almost 4 million. In 1820, the governor of Virginia, Thomas Randolph, attempted legislation to remove all slave youths to Haiti and thus let the existing population die off naturally. The bill died without discussion. Another problem with the deportation was the staggering cost, an estimated $1 billion. $600 was the cost.